A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished guests. And on behalf of the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of our guests joining us for the 10th Singapore Maritime Lecture as part of the Singapore Maritime Week 2016. My name is Lavinia Tan, and it is an honor to be your MC for this morning. Now, the Singapore Maritime Lecture is an anchor event of the Singapore Maritime Week, where international renowned personalities, they will bring their thought leadership to strategic issues of concern to the maritime industry. Now, the inaugural Singapore Maritime Lecture was delivered by the late Minister Mentor, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and this was back in 2007. Now, this forum has since then been attended by business leaders, both from the local and the international maritime community, as well as senior government officials. Now, this year, it's a very special year indeed. The Singapore Maritime Lecture celebrates its 10th edition, and with a brand new format comprising of a keynote speech followed by a high-level panel discussion. So with this refreshed format, we would like to encourage each and every one of you, our dear audience, to participate during the panel discussions, and we welcome you to submit your questions anonymously via the Pigeonhole Live platform, or if you would like to name yourself, that is fine with us as well. Now, at the same time, we are also taking a poll on your opinion on the future outlook of the industry. Now, instructions for this can be found as well on the screen that you see, as well as on the information sheet in the event folder that is on your tables in front of you. And we'd also like to point out that Wi-Fi access is readily available for you. All you need to search for is the network named Ritz-Carlton. And there is no login password needed. All you need to do is to click on the network. You will be directed to a page, and just click on the connect button, and there you have it, Wi-Fi access. So to kick off this morning's program, we have prepared a very special segment to commemorate the 10th edition of the Singapore Maritime Lecture that will bring you through the development of maritime Singapore and how our ports have evolved to its present day. Our sound artist, Mr. Lawrence Koh, he specializes in both the visual and the performing arts and has performed widely in the international arena. Through a combination of sound, music, and light, he has recreated countless stories and inspired audiences with larger-than-life impressions of historical and present-day events. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming and presenting to you Mr. Lawrence Koh. gentlemen, a big round of applause to Mr. Lawrence Code for such a spectacular show. That was truly amazing. I don't think for all my time as a child, spending that time in a sandbox, I don't think I've made anything this beautiful. Did anybody recognize their ships? The detail involved. I'm sure you must have recognized your ships, right? One of you was like, hey, that's my ship right there. That was a beautiful start. Thank you so much, Mr. Ko. Now, before we start the lecture, I happen to observe that within this group, we have our guests networking already, handing out name cards. We'd also like to point out and encourage you to actually download our Singapore Maritime Week app. It's the SMW 2016 app, and this is also a great way for you to network with the other delegates as part of the Singapore Maritime Week, because all of the registered delegates, your informations are available through this app, and it has an inbuilt messaging platform that allows you to get in touch immediately with all the registered delegates. So you can download this app. It's very simple. The app is available on both Google Play as well as the App Store, and it's also going to keep you informed of all the event happenings as part of the Singapore Maritime Week. Now, it gives me great pleasure to invite on stage. He is the chairman of BW Group, BW LPG Limited, BW Offshore Limited, and Singapore Maritime Foundation. He has also served as a non-executive director of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, the London P&I Club, the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, and the Esplanade Co. Limited, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Mr. Andreas Soman-Powell. Mr. Soman-Powell, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 10th Singapore Maritime Lecture. This is the anchor event of Singapore Maritime Week, and for those of you who have been attending for the past 10 years, you will know there has been an illustrious lineup of past speakers. We are fortunate to be joined today by a highly distinguished speaker, Mr. Kristian Siem. He is the chairman of Siem Industries, an industrial holding company engaged in oil and gas services, shipping, solar farms, wind farm installations, potash mining, shipbuilding, and financial investments. Kristian is the major shareholder and chairman of the world-leading subsea company, Subsea 7. In addition to his multiple business interests, he has been a director and/or chairman of Transocean, Norwegian Cruise Lines, Oslo Reinsurance, and Kværner, amongst others. He is a Knight First Class of the Royal Norwegian Order, and he has even managed to raise 4 children while doing this. So today you can ask him about oil, shipping, offshore, wind, solar, cruise, insurance, shipbuilding, even potash mining, and we will come out of the room smarter than when we entered it. To give you a sense of the man, I remember 3 years ago sitting with him and a group of maritime leaders in a discussion session on the sidelines of North Shipping. Oil was at $110. Someone said he could see a risk of oil dropping to 80, but there was no chance it would go below 60. Kristian immediately shot back, "Why not?" It was a prescient insight and an important reminder to stay open to all possibilities. We stand at a moment in the oil and maritime industries which will be written about in the history books. Kristian, we look forward to hearing your views and to asking you and the panel lots of questions thereafter. Please, if you'll join us.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, Andreas, thank you for those generous words, and thank you to the artist. So simple. Simplicity is something we need to learn in the oil industry. And now, when we are faced with a need, we will. But what is life without art? I will talk a bit about how I see the oil industry, the state of the industry today. I've been in this industry for 44 years, and I don't know any other industry that is more impressive than the oil industry. The oil industry has organizations that are second to none in the world. They have efficiencies. Yes, they are conservative, and they, like all of us, when we have too big margins, we tend to waste a bit. Now, in a new situation that the industry is in, we will find ways to take out that waste. It's also an industry that has a safety record that is often better than industry on shore, despite the fact that we operate in a very challenging environment. We are an industry that has a reputation with the public at large, which is so low that I cannot describe it. And we are not very good at communicating to the world what we are doing. And of course, when we have a Macondo incident, it is spread throughout the media, throughout the world, and it sets us back many, many years. I just want to point to you, without for a minute diminishing the disaster that Macondo was, but when it came to the pollution and all the talks that have been about how damaging Macondo was for the environment, I just want to put it a little bit in perspective by pointing out that the oil that actually escaped from Macondo was about 3 years of escape in the Gulf of Mexico only from natural seepage. You know, the crust of the earth has a few cracks in it, and there's a natural seepage from the various traps of oil in the crust of the world. And this seepage in the Gulf alone is every year about the third of Macondo, just to put it in perspective. Now, before I go into the details of the oil industry, I remind you that in this capital-intensive industry, we have to make decisions that last for 25, 30 years. So to be the leaders of this industry and make the right decisions has a huge consequence for all stakeholders, not the least all the people who sweat every day and work for us. It doesn't help how hard they work if we take the wrong decisions. And I wanted to start today by looking at the environment we are operating in. We have had a long period of time since World War II where we had growth and we had a relatively peaceful environment, and it was really exciting to be part of the progress. Now we have some new elements since the turn of the millennium which are very challenging. The Islamic extremism, terrorism and wars, corruption, migration that comes from terrorism and wars. We have an increasing world population and increasing unemployment and limited GDP growth, and I think we should get adjusted to a new world with an economy that will at best continue to grow, but I don't think we are seeing a slow down and small growth for a little while and then we will have a strong growth again. It's more likely that we will have a low growth environment for some time to come. We also have this funny notion of a negative interest rate that we have to get our arms around it. It's kind of an artificial thing to me, and it's another factor that we have to keep in mind when making the decisions and what effect will it have. And then another factor is political correctness, because political correctness is not good leadership. And leadership is probably the most important factor that I can point out. If I wanted to say something that I've learned in 44 years in business, it is leadership is the most important. Leadership is also the most important in politics. And I'm delighted to stand here and talk about leadership in Singapore, who has had this exemplary leadership that has created an exceptional nation to the benefit of all, opportunities for all. It's all thanks to leadership. So with that, I'll take a look at the oil price. We all try to make up our mind where is the oil price going, because it influences everything we do so strongly. It's no question that the oil price is a driver for activity and determines the future of our industry. However, nobody knows where the oil price is going. It's too complex. There are too many factors. Here are some of the factors that influence the oil price. And therefore, we must just accept that we can only guess where the oil price is going. But what is clear is that if the oil price does stay low, it comes a point when the world has to replenish reserves. And we see that we are now in a situation where we are consuming twice as much oil, at least, that we, compared to the replenishment of oil, and that can not sustain itself for very long. Let's put the oil price in perspective. Here we see that the inflation-adjusted oil price today is about the same as the average for the last 70 years. We also take a look at what will be the need for energy and how is that need going to be covered in the years to come. I apologize, but this chart only goes to 2040. But in that time span, which is certainly the foreseeable future for an old man like me, we see that oil and gas will be the most important source of energy. It's great to see what's happening in the renewable industry, but the oil and gas industry is here to come, and that's the point I wanted to make with this slide. The costs is coming down, and I'll touch upon this throughout my speech. And we have had a dramatic fall in the oil price, but we have had a dramatic fall in the costs. And that means that many of the fields and the prospects that the oil companies are facing are at a profitable, they are all profitable as a result of this cost reduction. And the cost reduction comes from the fall in rig rates and vessels and support services. That's part of it. The other part is efficiencies. And the whole industry is now searching for efficiencies in a very admirable way, and which I'll come to. So how do the oil companies react to the new state of the industry with the low oil price? We've had a period, if you go back to 2014, the oil companies were cutting back already then, before the oil price had fallen, on their capital expenditures, because the cost of developments had left them with smaller margins, and they wanted to give priority to paying dividends. And you can understand, you're running a company for the long term, you want to have your shareholders supporting you, and therefore you want to have a steady, good dividend yield over many years. However, when you then start borrowing to pay dividends, it's no longer sustainable. And when you then get the fall in the oil price on top of that scenario, then something has to change, and it will change, and that is my prediction for the future. The question is, when will that change in mindset of the boards of our oil companies come? It's clear that the oil companies need to replenish the reserves. They can do that through mergers, and we see BG Shell. And it's clear that when an oil company has acquired a lot of reserves through a merger, they're probably cutting back on some of the capex to look for additional reserves for a while. But as an industry as a whole, we need to replenish. It is an opportunity now with the low oil price also to look at decommissioning. And it's a hope for the supply chain that will happen. It's quite a bit of work to be done there. And now that the prices are down, this is the time to do it. And it remains to be seen whether the oil companies will continue to push for or push it into the future in order to have the delay in the expenditure, or if they will take advantage of this low cost level. The other thing that the operators are more open to now than ever. I, as a contractor to the oil industry, has been telling the operators that why don't you focus on working closer with us? Because you're not buying from us a piece of tool or equipment, or you're more buying a process. We're working together to install and engineer and fabricate and interact with all the other contractors when we develop a field. That is a process, and we depend on each other to a large extent. If we can plan that process better, there is huge economies in that. And if you compare the savings in doing that better to the margin that we earn, you don't have to hammer down our margin anymore, because that's small fry. They never really listened. They listened on the top, but the organizations of the oil companies were continuing the industry sport of hammering our margin, to my displeasure. And of course, there are also many consultants that work for the organizations among the operators, and they want to prove how clever they are in squeezing our margins. However, today, I really sense that there is a different mindset and more openness to finding better ways. So the early interaction between operator and contractor in the planning phase, when you really can influence the cost, is happening. And the other is, of course, standardization of both processes and equipment is a very important factor. You know, I think I heard the other day that there are some 10,000 different Christmas trees, and there's probably, if you took 100 different Christmas trees, they will cover at least 90% of the needs. So there's a huge opportunity to reduce cost by standardization in our industry. The other thing we see with the operators is when they have the upper hand, which they practically do through all phases of the market, ups and downs, they tend to squeeze the contract and push the risk over in our lap. Yes, that's understandable, but it comes a point where we as contractors have to stop. And last year, we actually put down the foot because the operators wanted us to be liable for consequential damages. They wanted us to be liable for gross negligence of our subcontractors in the smallest manner. And what does that mean? It means that coincidence. The contractual terms are very important, and I was saying that if too much risk is pushed onto the contractor will not survive. In the underwater construction business, which is the most complex part of the offshore field development, I just told Andreas today that he's a lucky man because he's paid by the hour like the drilling industry and like the boat industry. We in Subsea 7, we are paid lump sum for doing engineering, procurement, development, transport and installation in 3,000 meters of water depth. And if something goes wrong, it's on us. However, that's enough risk for us. We cannot take also the consequential risk of pollution, for instance, then we'll disappear. And there are three main leaders in our industry. It's Technip, Saipem and Subsea 7. And it's not in the oil company's interest to wipe us off the surface. So what we find is that many of the oil companies, they go to smaller companies who can do part of what we can do, and then they give them the job. And of course, if the risk materializes, then they have very little to lose, because their only hope is to take this contract on in the first place. Otherwise, they will not be around anyway. The other thing is the counterparty risk. You know, I've been surprised to see how oil companies, including Statoil up in Norway, have been prepared to disregard the counterparty risk of some smaller contractors when we have built up a substance. We have the financial strength, but we also have a lot more redundancy. We have programs for safety that smaller contractors don't have. So therefore, our cost base is a bit higher. We need to be paid for that. So let me then move to what will be the reactions by the contractors in this situation. One is new technology, and I'll come to that in a minute. The other is consolidation, and particularly in the OSV, offshore service vessel sector, we will see consolidation, and it's necessary to see consolidation. And through consolidation, we will see meaningful reduction in operating costs. To have one vessel in Australia and another 2 vessels in West Africa and then maybe a few in Brazil is very inefficient, and it also creates mobilization costs which can be reduced. To have a larger fleet under one management means that you have a greater exposure to the clients worldwide and can interact and plan the operation in a better way, and improve the ability to meet the client's needs. The name of the game for the contractors now is to preserve cash. Lay up vessels to preserve cash is one way. If you don't have employment, the worst thing you can do is to have full operating costs and wait for work. The next worst thing is to have employment and with a client who don't pay, and you actually pay for the operating cost. I also think it's time to look at getting rid of the old vessels. And if you look at vessels that are built before 2000, they will be 20 years old when we begin to see light in the tunnel again. So most idle vessels built before 2000 should probably go. On the technology front, this is a fabulous industry, also from a technological standpoint. In my 44 years, I've seen what the semi-submersible was in 1972, what it is today. It's two very different animals. And also to see, if you look here at the lower right corner of this slide, you see subsea processing. That's where we're heading. Instead of bringing all the production up to a platform or FPSO or whatever, we'll do the processing on the seafloor and save cost in a big way. That was something, when I started, was some crazy engineers were having ideas about this, and it was like space technology for us. Now we have leapt ahead of that. I'll point out another two here. We see on the lower left corner, this ROV, remote operated vehicle without umbilical. It's out there driven by battery on its own. This is a research project we have had for years in Subsea 7, and it's coming. And in the middle upper part of the picture, you see one of the buoys. This is a buoy that we installed for the first time in the Guarulhos field in Brazil. The buoy is sitting 200 meters below the surface, and then it takes all the tension from the risers from very deep water, and it pulls it onto this buoy, which is held up by buoyancy. That means that you have less pressure on the FPSO, so you can build a smaller FPSO and save cost. The other thing that the industry is doing is improving in addition to the improving of the cooperation between the operating and the contractors themselves are entering into alliances. And that is to coordinate the different activities that are necessary for field development. And by the industry getting together in alliances, instead of fighting each other, they are now working together. They're sitting together at the planning stage and finding ways to interact in a harmonic way rather than to end up with a hostile situation in the field when it's too late to make changes, and then sitting in isolation and trying to see how they can take advantage of that situation to improve their financial situation. We have on the cooperation with the clients, we have seen sometimes that we've been able to have a sort of exclusive working relationship with a client. This started some 7-8 years ago in the UK with with Centrica and some of the companies that Centrica acquired, where they were fairly small operators, and they were the last behind in the queue for our services. It was a strong market, and they said, in order for us to get your attention, we need to engage Subsea 7 as the exclusive service provider. And what happened then is that the company had practically no people. They said that Subsea 7 has its engineers that do the work that is defined to be Subsea 7's responsibility. And they let us get on with the job. We had less interference from the operator, and the execution of those projects are the best execution we've ever had. And some lessons here have led to these three companies doing the same. We also see that these alliances I referred to, we have in Subsea 7, we have an alliance with the KBR, Granhern, where we actually do the FEED studies for the oil companies at the early stage, and it's at the early stage that we have an influence on the cost. We also have the alliance with OneSubsea. OneSubsea has now been, that was a subsidiary of Schlumberger and Cameron, and we have seen some consolidation in the industry already there, where Schlumberger has acquired Cameron, and therefore OneSubsea is Schlumberger, and that's our partner there. Subsea 7 is not the only one is going this way. You have FMC and Technip have created their alliance. General Electric and McDermott have an alliance, and Baker Hughes and Aker Solution. So we see the whole industry is beginning to think in this way, and I am absolutely convinced that that will lead to better execution of offshore field developments and reduce the cost. Now, this downturn, the key question, how long? There are two aspects of this question. The first aspect is, when will we see an increase in activity? And that's different from the second question, is when do we have balance in supply and demand of equipment? Increase in activity, as I said before, I don't think the boardrooms will sit quiet and continue to borrow money and pay dividends in this situation for very long. I think next year they will begin to look at the reality that they need to replenish reserves, and they will see that the cost of field development has come down, and they have a lot of prospects on the shelf that they can start developing economically. And therefore I think there will be a shift, and it's only my guess, but there will be a shift in the thinking in the boardrooms already next year, and that will lead to some more activity in 2018. Now, what will happen to the rates for the supply chain? That's a different question. Well, first I wanted just to point out that the replacement ratio last year was the lowest since before 2000. But let me come back to the supply and demand in the supply chain. You see here, this is the OSV space. These are just some of the competitors. It's very, very fragmented. And it's a new fleet. If you take a look at the right side of this slide, that is, that's the bulk of the OSV fleet. It will be 2040 before they are old. So it will take a long time. The development of the OSV fleet has gone from 1,000 units in year 2000 to 3,900 today, or end of last year. The rigs, drilling rigs, all drilling rigs, jackups and floaters, have gone from 525 to 829. And for deep water rigs, it's even worse. There has been a revolution of building new deep water rigs, because their thinking was that that's where the activity will be, that's where the big fields are, and there will be a lot of activity, and that's right. There will be a lot of activity also in the future. But the numbers of new buildings in the deep water rigs have been staring us on the eyes for 3 years, long before the downturn. Nobody did anything. So I cannot see a balance in that space before way into the next decade. So what is the future? It's a great industry. There will be more activity. We have to suffer from imbalance of supply and demand in the supply chain because of overbuilding for some time. But back to leadership. If we have the right leadership, we will stare through this dark tunnel and find light at the end of it. Thank you very much.